The good food is primarily, again, what our ancestors ate and as little destroyed as possible before we buy it. So all the packaged food, all the processed food, it's basically destroyed already because they broke it down and they put it on a shelf and they processed it not for our benefit, not to become a better food, but to taste better, taste more addictive, and to be able to sit on the shelf for 2 years. Because the biggest problem with real food is that it spoils. It interacts with oxygen and bacteria because it has nutrients, it has value. That's why it reacts and spoils. And that's why it's hard to keep fresh veggies in the store, and they get expensive because they have to throw half of it away, and then you buy it and you throw half of it away. So that's why it's so easy with processed foods, because it's there, it's in a package, it keeps for the next couple of years. I don't have to worry about it. There's no spoilage, and that's part of why it gets so cheap. So that's the stuff that we want to avoid, because once it keeps forever, it means that it really has very little nutritional value for you. Okay, it has calories. So if you're starving, it will provide you some energy, but it won't build your body in the long term. It won't give your body the resources that it needs to function. So that's why we want to go back again to what our ancestors ate. And we want to eat meat, fish, chicken, eggs, anything that could possibly exist at their time. And leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables, some amount of fruits and berries, especially seasonally. I don't think you want to go totally paranoid about the seasonality. I think plant food can have some benefit throughout the year, but we still kind of want to understand it, that for our ancestors, it wasn't like 365 days a year that they had access to this. And then I think they had some nuts and seeds, and probably some tubers. And that's basically what we should eat, and as little spoiled as possible. Then I also think, so if we look at what our ancestors ate, that's basically what a paleo diet is by principle. So what I think that is, I don't see that as a law. I don't see that as a rule, an absolute. I think what it says is, if you make this food your foundation, then that's the one that's most probable to serve you, the most likely to give you the least problems. Okay. And the more that you stray from that, the more likely that you'll have reactions or deficiencies. So, for example, I don't think that dairy is terrible unless you have a sensitivity to it. But also the biggest reason people have sensitivities and react is because it's not a whole food anymore. It's pasteurized. Again, we said if man hasn't destroyed it, it's probably good. Well, man has destroyed milk because we pasteurized it. We kill off the enzymes, we kill off the bacteria, we denature the proteins, we homogenize the fat. It's a completely different food than raw milk, which of course now we can only consume, we can only purchase as pet food. But whole raw milk is basically a health food, and pasteurized milk is very questionable. Some people can tolerate it. Like, I'll have an occasional cappuccino because homogenized milk will foam and raw milk won't. So I'll have that vice once in a while, and I don't react to it. But if you do, then it's not for you. And I think other things like beans and potatoes that there are more recent innovations, I don't think that they're horrible. I think you have to weigh them in based on where you are metabolically. I think if you're a type 2 diabetic and you're trying to start a campaign, therapeutic process to lower it, then you don't want to eat potatoes every day or at all. So I think a lot of those foods will sort of depend on where you are on the metabolic spectrum. And I would say that most foods that are sort of newer than our Paleolithic food, our ancestors' foods, they're not evil or dangerous just because our ancestors didn't have them, but the probability that they're going to cause some sort of reaction increases from there. So then you just have to kind of figure out how do you respond to them and what do they do to you?
Okay, you touched on the metabolic health piece. That's where I want to come back to. Somebody who's in that category right now of being insulin resistant, which is around 9 out of 10 North Americans.
Yeah.
How different does that plate look for them if they're committed to reversing what we've been talking about?
So again, I'll give some numbers, and I want people to understand these are not absolutes. This is hypothetical example, and your numbers could vary double or half from those. But I think someone with type 2 diabetes that is trying to reverse it, they basically need to go keto most of the time. Okay, you don't need to be keto 365 days. I think there's value to cycling because it shakes things up. It keeps the body on its toes. I think it helps it adapt if we cycle a little bit. But I think they need to be in keto, whatever that means for you. But for most people, it's between 30 and 50 grams, no more than 30 or 50 grams of net carbs, meaning total carbohydrates minus the fiber. But it doesn't, if you eat in that level, it doesn't mean that you're on a ketogenic diet if you're not making ketones, right? So I think blood glucose meters and keto meters are very, very helpful. I don't think that you should use them every single day, but you should get one and use it long enough that you can figure out how your body responds. Okay, then you can take a break for a month or until you try something new. But it teaches you a lot. And if you eat 30 grams of carbohydrates, net carbs, and you prick your finger and your keto level is 0.2, it's not really working for you, right? Someone else might eat 70 grams of net carbs and produce ketones if they're very active or a larger person. So that's the first thing. I think they need to be very low carb, and they need to make sure that they're producing some ketones, because otherwise they're not in ketosis, even if their diet indicates that. Then I think if you're insulin sensitive, if your blood glucose is fasting blood glucose is in the 80s and your insulin is between 2 and 5, then it's going to depend on your age and how active you are. But I think you can, in a healthy way, eat probably up to 100 grams of net carbs. And if that doesn't change your numbers long term, then it's not too much carbs for you, at least at that age, right? So we want to get away from this idea of absolutes. We just want to understand the principles and then do something and make sure we get the results. And if the results aren't coming, then we get more information. Like we prick our finger to see, am I really in ketosis? Or we get some blood work. Blood work is never a bad idea to get a baseline to understand where you are, because some people have been on, and this is especially for females who have extremely stubborn weight loss, that they could have been low carb for years. Their glucose and A1C is ideal. Their glucose of 85 and their A1C is 5.2, and yet their insulin is in the 20s, right? So they're controlling their glucose, which is great because they're already limiting their metabolic side effects, but they're still extremely insulin resistant. So for them, whatever they're doing just really isn't changing the picture much. So everyone is different. Everyone needs to go to different extremes. And another thing about keto that there's some huge misconceptions. I don't want to think of keto as a high-fat diet for several reasons. First of all, fat is the primary fuel for humans. So I think anything under 50% fat in your diet by calories is low fat. Okay. So it's not a high fat diet, it's a low carb diet. Because it's not about eating more fat, it's about lowering the insulin. And if you, and a lot of this is so ridiculous. A lot of the studies that they've done on high fat, low carb diets, they give them 30% carbs and 40%, 45% fat. That's still a high carb, low fat diet. In terms of making metabolic changes, that's not doing anything. So of course they're not going to see any results. And then if people try to do keto and they're told it's a high fat diet and they keep eating what they used to and they just pile on the fat, now you're not lowering the insulin. And that's the key. It's not about eating more fat. It's about eating less stuff that trigger insulin, right? So I tell people it's a low carb diet. It's a moderate protein diet. And then the fat is just the rest. Don't worry about it. It's fat to satiety. You make yourself a chicken salad. You put enough olive oil or whatever on it until you're full. But it's not a high fat diet. It's low carb, and then you just fill in the rest of the stuff until you're satiated, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to sustain this. If you feel deprived, you're going to do this for a few weeks or a couple of months, and then you're going to fall back to old habits because you're deprived.
You gave that example there, the chicken salad. Can you give an example again of a classic keto plate versus this keto that you're talking about, just to give people a visual?
Not sure what you mean there, classic plate.
Like a high-fat keto diet that most people would be talking about when they say keto. You're making a point here of saying, don't add the additional fat, but it's still keto.
Yeah.
So I just want to understand the contrast between two different plates, the way you're explaining it versus classic keto.
Yeah, the way I'm saying it, is just that you focus on the carbs, and then the rest will basically take care of itself. The part where people get confused is if they don't understand that it's about the carbs, now they may not cut back on them enough, because the public perception is that it is a high-fat diet. That's all they know. And yes, it is, but it's only high fat because the carbs are extremely low and you have to get your fuel somewhere, right? So it's one replacing the other. And as long as you keep your carbs down to 5%, for some people, or 10% for others of net carb calories. The rest is really going to take care of itself. And then when you choose your protein, then if you go ground beef, you don't buy the lean ground beef. You buy at least 15% fat. If you buy a steak, then you buy the one that has some fat in it. You buy the fatty fish. You buy the chicken with the skin, like wings or thighs, where you get the fat. And you don't, and it's not like you have to seek out the fat. Just don't buy into the idea that low fat is good. Like, I'm amazed that how much chicken thighs they're selling. No, sorry, chicken breast. That's nasty stuff. It is dry and devoid of flavor, and it costs more. But the only reason they're selling it is people are so bought in. They're so on board with the low fat idea. In Greece, they have something. The yogurt in Greece is called Greek yogurt, and they make it basically from half and half. The basic fat level is around 10%, and when you make it that way, you don't have to strain it. It gets thick and delicious and creamy without any straining or preparation. In the US, it's always fat-free. Fat-free Greek yogurt, fat-free. And then they just strain out all the extra liquid, and now it's like this paperweight inconsistency, this pudding. And it makes no sense. It's like you do it the natural way. You just take the milk, the dairy product, you add the bacteria, and it's done. And if you keep it above like 8% fat, it's going to gel perfectly. It's going to taste wonderful and creamy. I make my own yogurt. I put it between 8 and 10% most of the time. But again, people buy into this notion of low fat, and you can't even buy high fat yogurt in the stores.
Okay.
The best you can do is whole milk, which is already strained, but almost everything that they sell is non-fat.
All right. So we're not avoiding the fat. We're embracing the fat.
Yes.
It doesn't sound like you're in this camp, but what do you think about adding, say, a slab of butter to the top of the steak, adding a whole bunch of heavy cream to your cappuccino? Is that something you ever partake in?
Yes. But not, because I think, again, low carb is the principle. Moderate protein, I mean, there's some range there we could talk about, but then the rest becomes fat. But when you do what you're trying to say, when you purposely try to exaggerate the fat, now you're kind of missing the point. I'll add a dab of butter, but I'll make it garlic butter on my steak because it tastes so delicious, not because I want an extra 20 grams of fat on it. And if I add cream to something, it's because it tastes better, not because I'm trying to add 20 grams of fat to it. Because what happens, and this is something else people don't realize, when you lower insulin, your body, you're reducing the thing that protects your fat stores. So now you have access to those fat stores. But if you eat more fat, if you eat so much fat that it provides more calories than your body needs, there's no reason, there's no incentive for your body to burn its own body fat. It's like, hey, why don't I burn this? It's already in the bloodstream. As a matter of fact, it can only burn the thing in the bloodstream. If you eat more fat, then you're going to have fat in the bloodstream, and you can't take fat from your body cells and push it into the bloodstream. That's not going to happen until you need it, right? So if you eat more fat than your body has a reason to use, you're not going to burn your body stores. So the reason the keto diet works, it's not because you're eating more fat, it's because you're lowering insulin. And even more importantly, you're reducing the addictive foods that make you overeat. Because this is all about hunger, right? If you eat junk food, if you eat 6 meals a day with high carbs, you're training your body to always refuel. And you're training your body to be addicted to things, because carbs are a drug. Why are all the comfort foods carbs? Because it changes how we feel. Okay, if it changes how we feel, it's a drug. And they know this, and they add chemicals to all these processed foods to accentuate that effect. So when you eat these processed foods, you overeat. But when you cut those out completely, and you start eating fat and protein for calories, and you keep the carbs low enough that insulin starts dropping, the single biggest benefit, in my opinion, is that you reduce cravings and hunger. That you're allowing your body to come back to that equilibrium, to the rules that it's supposed to play by before you change the rules with modern processed foods. So, and especially if you time restrict it, because there's no reason to eat 16 hours a day. And if you eat 2 or 3 meals within an 8-hour period, you cut back the carbs, you focus on moderate protein, you eat the rest fat. Now you will eat a caloric deficiency. You will have a caloric restriction because your body is going to go back to the innate balance that it knows is healthy. However, this basically only works if you're overweight, because the body wants to be healthy. It knows what balance is. So if you're normal weight, you're not going to create a caloric deficit. Your body, you just learn to control your hunger. And that's why these low-carb diets work, because they restore your normal hunger and signaling patterns so you can lower insulin, create a caloric deficit, and start pulling fat out of your reserves.
Okay, so moderate protein. I want to come back to this macro.
Yeah.
Talk about any additional details, how you think about that.
So, first of all, the USDA recommendations, I think, are way, way too low. And a lot of the recommendations they have is basically to avoid deficiency diseases. They're not for optimal health. So I think we need to go a little bit above that. But then there's the thing, again, about insulin. So fat has the lowest insulin response, insulin index. So for pure fat, you can think of the insulin response as single digits. For protein, you can think about it like in the teens or 20s. And for carbohydrates is from the 50s and up to 100. All right? Just to get, because they all trigger insulin, but to vastly different degrees. Carbohydrates are fuel, fat is the better fuel. Protein's not supposed to be fuel, it's supposed to be building blocks. It has amino acids for tissues, for bones and muscles and skin and hair and any other tissue. They're built of protein. And there's a turnover, and protein breaks down. We recycle some of it, we lose some of it, and we need to replenish it enough to rebuild tissues. But any excess above what we can incorporate into our tissues has to go somewhere. Okay, we can't store, there's no protein stores, there's no cells that store amino acids. It's stored as bone and muscle, essentially. And if we can't incorporate anymore, we have to turn it into something else. and that something else is glucose. It's called gluconeogenesis, right? When we do glucose, we need to get it out of the bloodstream, so we need insulin. And that's why protein raises insulin. So basically, the greater your protein need, let's say you're super deficient in protein, then your body is going to suck up almost 100% of that and turn it into tissue. But if you already has a really good status of protein and you go eating 100 grams of protein powder or lean protein, most of that is going to turn into glucose. So the insulin response depends on how badly does the body need protein. So excess protein is what turns into glucose and triggers insulin. So that's kind of how we want to think about it. So if you're diabetic, again, you're very insulin resistant and you're trying to change that, now you probably want to be a little stricter than someone who's like either a active, an athlete, or someone who's insulin sensitive, because you just know, hey, if I want to burn that fat, then I need to make some ketones. I want to make sure that that fat is actually burning. But if you eat so much protein that you're making a lot of gluconeogenesis, that's going to offset, that's going to decrease your fat burning and your ketones. So again, I think we don't have to be afraid of protein. I think it's super important, and they're finding more and more how it is very important to muscle mass and how tightly muscle mass is tied to healthy aging and longevity. One of the strongest signs that you'll do well in older age and you'll have a high quality of life is how much muscle you have. How strong are your legs? Can you still do a squat? So for that reason, I think we should rather err on the higher side, so to speak, of protein, because it will never become a problem until we sort of seek out extremely lean meat. If we only eat protein powder and rabbit, then yes, we're going to eat too much protein because the body is not, it's going to get toxic with nitrogen because it can't balance out the processes of processing and getting rid of it. But other than that, you don't have to be afraid of it. If you eat, like I said, you eat your meat with fat, you eat the ground beef with fat, you eat the steak with fat, you eat the fatty fish and the chicken, and you add some olive oil and some creamy sauces, you're not going to overeat protein. But like a vegan, I think they're probably going to be protein deficient, even if they have a sufficient number of grams of protein, because the quality isn't there. It's very difficult to, I mean, it's doable, but it takes a lot of planning to combine the plants to get that. But that's another story. So the amount of protein, I think the only ones that have to cut back is if you're actively trying to reduce your insulin. If you're trying to make ketones and you have a hard time doing it, then the protein could be the thing that is preventing you. So then I think it could be worth going down from 20% of calories to 15% of calories, or even 12, to see if that changes anything and if you can get things moving. But once you're in maintenance, I think it's better for us to probably be a little bit higher, like 20-25% of calories from protein.
Okay, I know you got to go soon. Last question for today. Somebody following the principles, dietary and lifestyle we've been talking about, they're bringing the insulin down, or at least they feel like they are, but they still have stubborn weight they're not losing. Where would you go with them to figure out what's going on?
That's a tough question because I think it would be almost impossible for that insulin to come down. They can bring down every other marker, but if the insulin is still high, then that's probably the main reason why they would still be overweight. And beyond that, I would start. Now they're going to be a very rare case, because most stubborn cases are going to be explained by insulin. I wouldn't say it's probably possible, but it's going to be extremely rare. And now I think you want to start looking at the emotional, structural. I want to make sure that you're handling all of these, and one more factor would probably be gut health. That because we're finding out more and more that there's a lot of signaling, a lot of metabolic signaling going on. And I would also look at, is there another source of inflammation other than insulin resistance? But I don't have a quick answer for that one, because that would probably be a case where you would need some guidance, someone who's very good, maybe better than me, who could really dive in to a lot of lab work, who could evaluate emotional past trauma, things like that. Because the human body is extremely complex. There's more about it that we don't know than that we do know. And once we get into things like your question, where it's that complicated, I think it's maybe more emotional, and there's some mechanisms that we understand very poorly. So there may be past trauma, counseling or treatment or clearing of those, meditation. But then also, as I said, you want to do the chemical, structural, and emotional at the same time for a period of time.
No, that's great. I was just looking for somebody that feels like they're doing the right stuff.
Yeah.
But they're not moving the needle and the weight's just not coming down. So you've given some clues, areas they can go inspect and see if that's applicable. Since you made it to the end of this clip, I know you're going to love the full episode. Click here to watch. I'll see you over there.
High blood glucose is one part of the problem. High insulin levels is a bigger part of the problem. High glucose causes swelling, microvessel damage, blindness, but high insulin clogs up